Welcome to Pario magazine, where I chat with individuals who have a desire to create. Today, I'm joined by a fellow movie lover, critic, and podcaster who, if he's not watching the latest Hollywood blockbuster, he's interviewing the stars or recording his own podcasts. Sometimes he's even hosting panels at film festivals. Welcome to Pario magazine, Nick Labaro.
Thanks, Jamie. Appreciate you having me, man. I'm excited to chat with you today.
My pleasure. We're here today to chat about your podcasting journey with film and Nick's Flicks Fix.
Yes.
Before we dive into that, do you want to give our audience a little intro as to who Nick is away from the cinema?
Oh, geez. Which is it's a lot of my life is consumed by the movies, so there's not a lot else that goes on. But I see, because you're wearing a Cronulla Sharks shirt, I'm a big rugby league fan. I'm a diehard Brisbane Broncos fan, which has been tough for us for the last few years. We lost a grand final, got a wooden spoon, and managed to not make the finals this year. So it's been tough for me for the last few years. But I'm a diehard sports fan. Cricket during the summer as well. Outside of that, I live with my partner. We've been together for almost 10 years, and she's a massive part of my life too. And yeah, like it's kind of just that in movies, man. To be totally honest, there's a lot happening in the movie space. It takes up a lot of my time.
Yeah. So how did you discover this sort of passion for movies?
Yeah, I've loved movies since I was a kid. My dad was very instrumental in showing me films and taking me to like video stores from a really young age. So I was just inundated with watching movies. A lot of our Friday nights were spent at the video store, grabbing like the 10 weeklies for $10 because I was never allowed new releases until I was like old enough to pay for them myself. And then we would spend all weekend just watching movies of all variety. So yeah, my dad was really instrumental in getting me into that. And then I took that love. I worked at a video store. I worked at a Blockbuster for 5 years. I tell people that's the best job I've ever had and probably will be the best job I ever have. And worked in a cinema as well. And yeah, kind of just clicked one day that I loved talking about movies so much. And, you know, growing up in the digital era, there was an opportunity for me to just jump on and talk about movies online and write about them and do videos about them and find like-minded people to do it with. So that's kind of where it all began. Just it was a good time and place in the digital space to do it and talk about something I love doing, which is watching heaps of movies.
That's awesome. How was that experience sort of working in a video store? You said it's the best job you've ever had.
Oh man, it like it was wild. Like because it was the last like dying years of the video store, so it was never as busy as it like probably was in the heyday in like the late 90s, early 2000s. But I met so many people there who it's honestly a lot like the movie Clerks. Like there is no other way to describe it other than we were kind of all there to mess around and get paid for it. So where I remember like Australia Day, there was like four of us working because we thought it would be busy. There was no one in the store. We started playing like cricket in the aisles. We were using DVD cases and a bouncy ball just to play cricket and stuff. So we were like messing around. But at the whole time we would have movies playing on the TVs that were in the video store. So I was watching heaps of stuff, and everyone who worked there was kind of like 5 to 10 years older than me. And I was 14, 15 at the time. And like at that age, you're looking up to anyone as a role model who has the same interests as you. So a lot of those guys were recommending movies for me to watch. So they were instrumental in that too. And it was kind of just like the dream job for a teenager, just to be able to like be surrounded by the thing you love, but not actually have to do a lot of hard work and get paid for it, you know? So that was, I think the dying days were kind of sad, like, because we were like selling loads of movies, so the store was getting like more and more bare as it was closing down. But there was always a part of me that like during that time I was like, oh, I love being around these people. I love being around DVDs. I love recommending DVDs to people. So just to be completely consumed by something you love and get paid for it is pretty awesome, to be honest. I think that's why I think it'll be the best job I ever have.
Yep. Yeah, I feel like you only ever work in a video store if you love movies. You're not going to go there just because you want to. Oh, that's the only job I can find at the moment.
I applied for everything like this. I was 14 when I got the job, and I applied for literally everything. It was like the classics of Australian culture: McDonald's, Hungry Jack's, Gloria Jeans, Kmart, Coles, Woolies, all of it. And I literally the day before applied for all of them. And I was a member at this video. My mum was a member at this video store. And I just walked in one day and they were like, oh, are you looking for a job by chance? And I was like, well, funny you ask. I've just done 400 resumes yesterday. And they're
Mhm.
like, "Oh, well, come in with the resume tomorrow." And I went with the resume, and they're like, "You can start tomorrow. Like, you're 14, you're cheap to pay." So that's kind of like the miracle of just like knowing I was going into the workforce and just by happenstance. Maybe some might call it fate, whatever, but like it was an awesome sort of entry into that door for sure.
Yep. And I think it's kind of sad now that sort of young movie lovers these days don't really get to experience that anymore of
No.
sharing that idea of going in and just looking at the vast breadth of
Oh,
movies that are available and having someone recommend like, "Oh, you liked this movie, check out this movie," because the Netflix algorithm is pretty good, but it's not as personalized as a human being giving you that, and I would love to
no.
see, like, your collection there with DVDs, like,
Mm,
I feel like that push back towards collecting physical media, we might
mm.
get a more boutique version of the video store at some point.
I would hope so. Like I agree with you. I think the algorithm aspect of it, especially with Netflix, is that it's a mixture of what you watch and a mixture of what they want you to watch.
Mhm,
And with the video store, it was kind of like the world was your oyster. You could be like, I could grab like two comedies, an action movie, a thriller. You'd try and sneak a horror movie in there, but like mum would find it and go like, "Yeah, I'm not letting you watch that. It's R18." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm old enough. I can do it." She's like, "No, not at all." Whereas these days, you kind of go, I think the physicality of it, like having something tangible in your hands and being like, if I'm going to spend my money on this, it has to be like something I really want to watch. Whereas today, you can just click a button, and if you don't like it within 10 minutes, you can just turn it off.
mhm,
It takes away sort of the fun, the mystery element of it, the sort of willingness to like let go of any sort of trepidations that you might have watching something and give something a go. And yeah, I hope like I know there's like an Airbnb that looks like a blockbuster, so like there's people who still crave this nostalgia. But yeah, I agree with you, man. I hope something comes up with just like a small independent video store. There was one locally, probably maybe like a 15-minute drive from me that only closed down earlier this year. And it was an independently owned. It was a small store, but like they were still trying to, you know, foster that experience for a long time after all the big chains closed down. Yeah.
yep, and, like, as someone that loves movies too, like, the
Mm.
Blu-rays and the DVDs, they have all that extra behind the scenes info that Netflix don't give you that.
No. No, not at all. And they were formative for me. I would probably watch the behind the scenes just as much as I'd watch the movies themselves. And you learn so much about not just how movies are made, but sort of, you find what a director's sort of personality is like when they're talking about movies they make. So if you like what they have to say, you go find more movies from them, or same with actors and writers and whatnot. Whereas, yeah, the streamers don't have that. It's one of those things where I think a lot of the magic behind the scenes of movies is kind of in this weird erasure at the moment, because like what is marketing movies is stars ultimately, and that's what you need, right? People usually go and
Mhm.
watch the big actors, but there was a point in time where you would kind of go like, "Oh, I can't believe that Star Wars: The Phantom Menace is being shot in the way it's shot," and I only found that out because we have this incredible behind the scenes sort of featurette that played on Channel 10 at 7 o'clock at night and stuff like that. So yeah, and being able to have that. Another big thing about these things is directors' commentaries. Those are incredible. I think people are missing out by not listening to directors' commentaries. The most iconic one is Hot Fuzz, where Edgar Wright does an audio commentary on Hot Fuzz with Quentin Tarantino. And rather than talking about anything that's happening on the screen, they're just geeking out about movies for 2 hours. And if you're a cinephile, like that's awesome. Like you want to hear that stuff. So yeah, there's so many positive things about physical media that hopefully never die. Like I do not want to see that this aspect of what I love die for sure.
So then what were some of your early favorite films, and how have the tastes changed over the years?
Yeah, good question. I grew up a big fan of, and this is probably an extension of what my dad would show me, was action films and a lot of like adventure films. So big ones growing up for me were The Goonies. Loved The Goonies growing up. It's still probably one of my favorite films today. I was shown probably a bit too young to watch like The Matrix, but I was shown that at a really early age, and it sort of gave me a love for that. Like I know it's a very modernized sort of like kung fu, but going into that sort of like martial arts action was a big one as well. Other formative ones, Holes was a big one for me growing up. I
Mhm.
love I love that movie so much. And comedy was big for me as well. I remember watching Rat Race again, probably far too young, but I remember sitting there with it was me, my dad, my cousin, and my brother, and the scene where they are hanging from a hot air balloon and like running into the cows into the field. And I'd never heard my dad laugh like that before, but then like a collective laugh between the four was just like a formative experience. So I kind of watched a lot of what my dad loved growing up, and then like the first real formative cinema, or not cinema, sorry, movie experience for me was when I watched The Departed for the first time. And I was probably like 14 years old. And it was the first movie for me that like clicked, where I was like, oh, this is like cinema, right? This is like someone genuinely making, like Scorsese making something that's not just entertainment. There's more going on in this film. And I probably watched that movie on repeat. Probably, I think I watched it back to back the first time I saw it, and I probably watched it almost every day for about a week after I had seen it for the first time. So that's like, they're the formative ones. And my tastes have changed, probably in the sense that I guess doing movie reviews and film criticism, whatever, you are forced to watch a lot more stuff. So I think I've been very much more open to a lot more things. Uh, I'm very in part, like, I love a chick flick, which is probably something like, as like a teenage boy growing up, like, who loved footy, you're like, oh, I don't want to watch chick flicks, they're for girls. But you're like, no, they're actually feel good. Like, who doesn't love love? So I've become a lot more accustomed to those. And I watched a lot more like those sort of epic 3-hour dramas that, I would probably just leave to film festival audiences, as a kid who grew up very much loving Hollywood. Watching more of those, I've definitely come to appreciate cinema as an art form, but I still very much have a love of all aspects of movies, for sure.
I'm sure your partner's very appreciative of you transitioning and enjoying the chick flicks a bit
it's
more.
It's funny because honestly, it is like her favorite movie of all time that she tells me is Maid of Honor. And I felt so bad the first time she tried to show it to me. It was late at night and I fell asleep. So I still haven't watched, we've been together for almost 10 years and I haven't watched her favorite movie yet. I've forced her to watch many things, but she's definitely appreciative of it. It's funny. We have very contrasting tastes. She is a big fan of, she does like the chick flicks. She likes a lot of like period drama, both documentaries and shows, loves reality TV, whereas I love horror, which she hates, and a lot of like, she likes action films, but I like the John Wick, that real sort of brutal action film, and she doesn't really love a lot of violence. So it's really funny when it comes to movie night in our house, trying to find something that that appeases everyone. She's definitely appreciative that I'm open to a lot more of the films she likes, though.
Brilliant. And then I believe your sort of journey started with the 60-second movie reviews on Instagram. Can
Mm.
you talk to me about the thinking and the process behind heading down that route rather than just going from being a fan of cinema to I'm going to actually get into the more professional like critique space?
Yeah, it was interesting for me because I think, like all great ideas, I guess, they either come to you when you're in the shower or post a breakup. And this one was post a breakup. And I was kind of like, I was working at a cinema at this point, so I was watching a lot of movies still. And I kind of just wanted to talk about them a lot. I was like, and I have my friend, I love my friends, but not as many of them outside of the film space, who people who I've met now have become my friends, were into movies the same way I was, or would watch a lot of the movies I did. So I think I was trying to find a community that fostered those sorts of conversations. And I don't mind writing. Like, I like writing. I write reviews now. I write interviews and stuff, but I very much prefer this. I prefer talking. I like the back and forth of conversation. You can, see body language and react to it like that. And I think my tone comes across a lot better talking and doing videos. And at the same time, I guess it might have been laziness to start with. I was like, I don't want to do like long videos for YouTube necessarily, which is something I had done previously. So I thought, well, Instagram do 60 seconds. Could I get a review done in 60 seconds and try and reach a broader audience of people who maybe aren't looking for movie reviews on their algorithm. But if a 60-second video popped up about, one of the first movies I reviewed, I think was the Sicario sequel, Sicario Day of the Soldado. And I was like, well, if people aren't looking for a Sicario 2 review, but one popped up on their Instagram and it was only 60 seconds long, they might take the time to look at it. And either two things could hopefully happen. They go see Sicario, which I liked and I hope they would enjoy, or they would go, oh, this guy might, steer me in the way of a recommendation for another film. And I think that's kind of where I wanted to like make a mixture of something I enjoyed doing, but something that was kind of like tangible in the sense of maybe fostering a bit of success with it as well and making it something that would actually be mildly impactful rather than just jumping on and hoping for the best, I guess. So it was a mix of the two.
Was sort of film media always the place you wanted to go? Did you ever sort of consider going down filmmaking?
Yeah, and big time. And probably before doing the reviews, I was more centric on being a filmmaker. I wrote scripts as a teenager, all about things only teenagers know. So like, no, actually, it's funny you bring this up. We were cleaning out some of our storage space recently, and I found a folder of like all the short scripts I wrote from like 13 to 20, and they're terrible. I reread them, and they're absolutely awful. But there was a part of me that was like, oh, I loved that I just like gave it a go and just had a shot with it. So that was definitely something I wanted to do. And I, with a group of friends that I worked with at Blockbuster, actually made a couple of short films together as a group, and we saw like varying levels of success. One of them went on to be it went quite viral, which was cool. And then we kind of used that momentum to make a few more. But I think there was a point where I kind of fell out of love with it in the sense of I love movies so much that I think making them at that point was taking me away from watching them, or I was being like, far too critical of processes of movies were being made. It kind of took some of the magic away from it for me. So I kind of left that group of people from what they wanted to do. One of them went on to actually become an actor. One of them now owns like his own media company and stuff. And the other guy has been writing scripts since then, which is awesome. Like I'm so thankful and that I got to do that with those guys. And I'm so happy they've been able to go on and do other stuff as well. But that was kind of the pivot for me where I went, I love consuming movies. And that to me was kind of more important, or felt like more of something I wanted to do than actually making them. But I'm so glad I gave it a go, and never say never. Like there's always ideas floating in my head of like, oh, this could be a cool movie, this could be a cool idea, but whether we act on them is another thing. So, but yeah, it was definitely there at some point. Yeah.
Yep. You've at least sort of got that little bit of an insight into
Hmm.
the process of making a movie and how
Oh
many
yeah.
people are involved to get even just
Oh
a short
man.
film out.
Oh, we like the longest one it ever took. We made a six-ish minute short film that we shot 4 people over 2 weeks, and like you wouldn't think like for 6 minutes of footage, some people could bust it out in a day, but just because you're pulling in favors from everyone, you're waiting for a location to be free, you have no money. The money that you have, you're spending on making sure like the people you've asked to come work for free can have a happy meal at the end of shoot and stuff. Like
Mhm.
it's crazy. So no, it was definitely an eye opener for me, and I think I respect, and a lot of that comes into my criticism as well. I feel like I respect the fact that it's incredible that movies can get made in general, no matter what the budget, no matter who's involved. There is still, I think that magic sort of came back to me once I was not making them, and I definitely put that aspect into my reviews. I would hope so, anyway.
Yep. Yeah, I've done a couple of little extra work pieces and just
Mm.
like you see just how in depth and how detailed it can be. Like
Yeah,
one of my scenes, I think, is like maybe 10 seconds on a show,
yeah,
and that was a half day of filming.
crazy, right? Yeah, that's it. And it's just because they got to get 6 different shots of that one scene, and you just have to be in all of them. Like it's wild. So, and it's always funny trying to explain that to people who don't necessarily understand, and no, through no ignorance of their own, they're just not as into it as we are. Trying to explain that to people who don't really get how movies and shows are made, it's such a weird thing to explain. It's such an incredibly, it seems so over the top. The half day's work for 10 seconds of footage. Be like, that's probably on a good day as well. That
Yep.
we've heard worse stories from within the industry.
So then on that, you've sort of grown this following and transitioned into all-round film coverage to share that insight into how much work goes into these films.
Mm.
Who have been some of your favorite interviews, and are there any that you still sort of can't believe happened?
Yeah, oh, I pinch myself all the time. I think because the interview aspect really kind of was something that initially fell into my lap, but then when I got a taste of it, I pursued relentlessly. And I think talking to people about it is kind of like the little Nick, the young Nick who was watching behind the scenes and listening to the director's commentary is so influenced now by me, like present day Nick, who's doing the interviews, in the sense of like I'm asking all the questions I would have asked as like a 5, 6, 7 year old, but obviously in a far more eloquent way. I would hope so. I speak Queenslander 90% of the time, which is unintelligible for most people. But yeah, absolutely. There's a part of me that with the interviews, like recently I got to talk to Viggo Mortensen, which was an absolute pinch me moment. Like I'm a massive Lord of the Rings, the movies fan, because I know that I know that fan base is like, if you haven't read the books, you're not a real fan. Well, I haven't read the books, but I love I love the movies, and I grew up watching them. I spoke to Viggo, and that was a huge pinch me moment. Um, One of the first big ones I ever got was Michael Bay for Ambulance, and I'm a Michael Bay film defender for the most part. I know he makes some questionable choices in some of his movies, but for the most part, I'm a fan of his style. So talking to him and getting to actually genuinely ask questions about his craft rather than just be the guy who's like, "Do you like filming explosions?" Like I hate asking those sorts of simple questions. So those are two real pinch me moments. But the ones that always stand out to me, the ones that are so memorable because of the interviews themselves, are the people who are quite receptive to being able to talk about the emotion that goes into either writing a story or playing a character, and that sort of thing. And there's been a fair few interviews this year where I've covered movies that deal with some pretty intense themes and intense subjects, talking to the people behind it with such a willingness to actually be so vulnerable, I guess, in the conversations to talk about either their own mental health or people who've spoken to people who suffer with mental health issues, about the inspirations I had in the film. I find that so interesting. I think that sort of breaks a barrier in what we can do in the interview space. I think there's a time and a place for like the influencer aspect of the culture where you get to play the games and you get to do something fun with the talent. But I think people do crave the genuine conversations. And I think that's what drives a lot of my questions is that like, if I met this person at like a party and we had to talk, I hate small talk. Like I hate coming. I was like, "How's your job? Is it going well?" Like, and then I'm also not the person who's like, "Are we alone in the universe?" I'm not asking those sorts of like big questions, but
Yep.
just cool conversation. You know what I mean? So I think that drives a lot of my sort of line of questioning, and I've had a chance to do that this year with a fair few directors and writers and actors who have been, you know, great, like gracious enough to be vulnerable about that, and I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I love that. Instead of just like the generic, this is just a promotional junket. We're actually
Yeah,
going to
100%.
maybe do an interview that might help someone in a totally different way than what they might even expect.
Totally, and 90% of the time, like with the movies that they're making, they want that reaction from people. Like you can have an action movie that is full of some of the coolest action movies you've seen, but if you're also featuring someone who's going through such a genuine character arc, that's why we remember those things. That's why the characters stick out sometimes more than the story does. And when you get to ask questions about that, and I kind of have I it's not a rule, but I'm always striving for, and maybe part of it is, you know, validation and a bit of ego stroking, I guess, but another part of it is to sort of break down the stigma of those generic junket questions in the sense of like I'm always trying to strive for someone to go, "Oh, that's a good question. Oh, that's a really good question.
Mhm.
That's a thoughtful question." And it feels great in the moment, but it's one of those things where I'm like, "Oh, I'd like to sort of at least break that stigma of, yeah, like you said, the generic junket stuff." And I think asking thoughtful questions, and actually putting time into it is what really makes that happen.
It's always a cool feeling when someone goes, I've never been asked that before.
Oh, it's the best feeling. It's so good because it means, you know, it means you've elicited that response because firstly you kind of give a shit about what they've made, and secondly you're not just trying to pass it off. I've been on red carpets before where people have gone, "Oh, have you seen the movie?" And I was like, "Yeah, have you?" Like, they're like, "Nah." It's like, I don't know what I'm going to ask this person. And I sit there and I go, "You work for like,
What?
you work for, I won't name, large corporation, news channel, etc., etc." I'm like, "What the fuck are you doing?" Like, this is, and it's kind of insulting to me, who's like, watched the film, and I've got, for a red carpet spot where you get to ask maybe 2 questions, I've got like 9 questions ready to go, just based on what the vibe is of the chat. But yeah, it's one of those things where you can always tell when someone has put thought into the questions, and then they can tell when you're interviewing someone. You can tell when they put a lot of thought into and it elicits a far better interview than a lot of the stuff you see come up on TikTok and stuff, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I know when I interviewed Samuel L. Jackson and Kurt Russell for The
Mm.
Hateful Eight, I think I watched that movie 4 times before I even sat down
Oh
to talk to
wow,
them.
that's a long movie too. But that
It
was
is
a
a
great
long.
interview though. Like, I've seen that interview, and it was a great interview because you got reactions out of them that you know 100% they were asked the same questions 20 times before you went into that room. And when you get them on off like autopilot, that's when you get reactions like the ones I had in that interview. So no, it was a great interview, man. But that's kind of, I'm thankful there's people like us in the space who are trying to do that. And like I said, there is space for the influencer side of things as well, because they are fun. I've watched the videos where they're like, let's play the game of like, will my character do this? Won't my character do this? I get suckered into it just like everyone else. I just don't
Mm,
want that to be 100% of the interviews that I see.
yep. Is there a bucket list dream interview that is still out there for you?
100%. And it's Nicolas Cage. And that's not because I think, like, I understand the memification of Nick Cage. Like, I get it. He's a wacky performer and he goes like all out. But there's two aspects. He's an actor I've genuinely loved for a long time. I think his boldness on screen is a part of the reason I love movies. I genuinely think, and it never happens because I'm not a big awards pundit, and I know horror doesn't get a lot of love at the Oscars, but I genuinely think Nicolas Cage should be nominated for Longlegs. I think that performance
Mhm.
was
Yep.
fantastic this year. So that's one reason. But and we share the same name, I guess. But we're actually born on the same day. We're both born January 7th. So I'm kind of
Oh,
like,
well.
I would just love to be in the room with him and to be like, hey, we're both named Nick. We're both born January 7th. I don't want to weird you out by that, but like, but there's like this connection
We
I've
both
had with
love
you.
movies.
Yeah, we both love movies, and I was like, "Do you want to run away together?" No, but he's a bucket list performance because I think he has incredible, and a lot of people probably don't know this, but if you watch enough interviews with him, he has such an incredibly encyclopedic knowledge of film, and he loves movies the same way we love movies. He studies the art of cinema, uh, but is also a casual movie watcher, just loves them for entertainment. And I think that's something that I would love to just talk to him about and sort of relate to him on a level. So that is the pinnacle. That is the bucket list. And I got to obviously do the long legs junket this year, but I didn't get to talk to Nick. So I was like, I feel like I'm getting one step closer every time I do an interview. So fingers crossed in the future we get him.
He has The Surfer coming out next year, I
He
believe.
does.
So
And it's a
that
Stan
might be the
movie, right?
chance.
That might be the chance. Fingers crossed.
And so we both know from experience with podcasting and film media that it's not as easy as some people might think. Like,
Mm,
so much work goes in before you get in to sit down with these interviews and do these reviews.
yeah.
What would you say have been the biggest challenges that you've had to overcome, or lessons that you've learnt during your
Mm.
time in the space?
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's a really good question because it's always, not that this is the challenge, but it's always tough to explain to people what does go into movie reviews and interviews and stuff. Because on the outskirts, and I totally get it, I just look like a guy who watches like 2 or 3 movies a day if I can, and then jumps on a Zoom call, talks to someone for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever, and then that's it. But there's all these other little things of like, you do kind of have to sit down and watch movies sometimes in a different way than entertainment. You are looking for things to talk about, and then you might find a reference point for something they've done previously. So you kind of go back and watch clips from a previous movie or a director, a different movie they've done, and you try and find connections with that. Like we were saying earlier, especially if you want your interview to be good, you kind of look for those reference points to go off. Um, so the challenge is always time. Like there's never enough time to be fully prepared for an interview 100%. Or when you're writing a review, you're always working to embargoes or deadlines, and you might not have put out your best work, but because an embargo's up, you kind of have to get your review out there.
Mhm.
A lot of people probably don't see the transactional element of it, is the fact that I'm so blessed to be able to watch so many movies for free, but the transaction is the studio require me to do a review. They want my thoughts, they want my opinions, and then that means like I can't just go and watch them and just be like, oh yeah, I enjoyed that, and I won't talk about it, and hopefully I get invited to the next one. Consistency is the absolute key, but there's the transactional element to it. So you want to put out your best work as quick as possible, but there's never enough time to do that. It's also taking time away from other aspects of life. Like I said, I've got a partner and we have friends and we have our social lives and stuff. And it's not always easy to balance that because, I'm very much a work orientated person. I love doing what I do. I'm always trying to keep busy. And sometimes that bleeds into personal life a bit too much. And there's been stern conversations I've had with my partner about, the feasibility of doing this as a career. What if we want to, buy a house? What if we want to have kids and all that sort of thing? You know, these are genuine conversations we kind of have to have about whether turning this into a full-time career or managing it part-time with other work that's guaranteed income. There's so many elements of it that when you are 18, 19, early 20s is far easier to deal with than when you're 30. And I don't think that's necessarily a negative, and it's not something that actually puts me off at all, but it's something I have to be aware of. And I believe everyone has sort of an emotional and a mental bandwidth when it comes to those things. So you've just got to find ways to deal with that are healthy, that are, you got to make sure that you are balancing that time correctly, that you are making sure that the things that are important to you outside of the work you want to do, that they know that they're important, or those things that are valued in your life as well. So I think that's the biggest challenge. I think a lot of people want to come in and in all honesty, and this is not to slag off on anyone, but a lot of people want to come in and watch free movies early. You get to see
Mhm.
him a couple of days before release. You get to see it for free in a big cinema. It's a lot of fun. There's generally security in the cinemas, so people aren't going to be on their phones and talking and shit like that. The
I think
allure
that's
of
my
that is
favorite
incredible.
part of seeing them early.
Oh man, that's the best part. It's the best part. I've seen security kick people out who've taken their phone out, and there's no better feeling. It's so satisfying. But people want that and they crave that, but they don't want to necessarily do the work that is required to maintain that status is probably the wrong word, but maintain the reward, I guess, for that. So yeah, that's a big challenge. I think I've seen a lot of people come and go in this space because of that. And it's tough, but at the same time, I think if you are genuine and want to actually do it, if you just want to do it recreationally and just like have fun doing it, absolutely, I think. But just know that there are people in the space who want to do this so actively as their work. People like me, and then we just got to make a few sacrifices to do that. So it's time consuming. It has to be a priority for very usually little to no financial reward.
Yep. Yeah, I
And
think that's probably the biggest thing to tell people that are looking to
yeah,
get into the film media space. You're
yeah.
probably not going to get rich doing this.
No, God, no, no. I don't know. I don't think I've ever met a millionaire movie reviewer. That's for sure. So, and if there is one, let me know what they did so I can figure it out too. But it's that, and I always tell people as well. And this is sort of a mantra I use. You've got to sift through the shit to get to the gold. A lot of people just want to come in and watch June Part 2 and review June Part 2, and it's like the second review they've done. If you're like writing for a site, or if I think that one of the good things is like I do Nova Stream stuff and independent stuff, so I can stretch myself a little bit thinner there. But people come in, they want to do that, but you kind of go, the first 6 months or 12 months that I was writing for Nova Stream, I got some really cool stuff, but I kind of had to go through a lot of those direct to streaming movies that end up getting like 10% on Rotten Tomatoes. And you kind of you've got to pave your way and prove your worth. And I think that's a fantastic training ground for reviewing. You get to, you work on your criticism. You get to work on your voice as a writer or as a podcaster or whatever. Um, and then you work up to the big things and do that. So, but it's always tough. People want to, they want to go to the premieres, they want to go on the red carpets, they want to do the interviews with the big stars. And that's even in the interview space. Like I love talking to everyone, but I'm not getting A-list celebrities all the time. Like that's the other thing, is that like I talk to a lot of people who are either starting out or they've only made a couple of films. And to me, they're the best conversations usually as well, because they're not media trained. So,
Yep.
you're not going to get a generic answer out of them. But it's a good training ground for me. I get better at interviews the more I do them as well. So it's still something I'm practicing after doing this for what, I don't know, like 8 or 9 years or something, like, so I think there's a lot of advice within them, but yeah, be consistent, do the job well, and make sure you sift through the shit to get to the gold is probably the main ones there.
Yep. And do it because you love it, not because you want to get
Oh,
rich or because you want to just get to these
100%.
cool events.
100%. Like, if it's like anything, if I didn't love it, I wouldn't be doing it. And there's absolutely things I've done work wise that I don't love, but because they paid the bills, you stick with them. This is something that, while it doesn't pay the bills, I I wake up every morning and it's the first thing I think about. It's the last thing I think about before I go to bed. Like, it's absolutely something that is so all consuming within me. But again, just about finding that balance as well. You have to live a life outside of it as well.
So then, as we close out the conversation, what were your top movies of 2024?
Yeah.
And what are the films you're most excited for in 2025?
I've got, yeah, I for this year, I think this year's been a pretty banger year for movies. So my favorite movie so far is The Substance. I think that
Oh,
movie is absolutely, in the best way possible, batshit crazy. It is wild, that film. But it actually, again, it's one of those movies that, like we were saying about characters being so important. It's an insane, cool premise body horror film, but it has so much to say about the treatment of women in art, in media, in Hollywood and stuff. It also has so much to say about the men who are involved in that as well, and the way audiences consume media. And so I think that's such a layered film. So that was great. I loved Furiosa. I think that was criminally underwatched. I was so sad when it kind of didn't do great at the box office. That was great. The Brutalist is fantastic, and what's one that I'll give a little blockbuster a shout out. I really, really enjoyed Twisters. I think
oh
Twisters was
yeah.
a hell of a lot of fun. Just some old school 90s movie making. You just got two hot Hollywood actors leading a film where they're just driving into the middle of tornadoes and at one point letting fireworks off into them. It was sick. So there's plenty. Yeah, I always release a list at the end of the year, and there's still a couple that I got to watch, but yeah, those at the moment. And then for next year, oh God, 2025. What is coming out next year?
Well, on my list, I have
Yeah, yeah.
28 Years Later. That's one
Oh,
I'm
yes,
super amped up for.
absolutely.
Smashing Machine with
Ah,
Dwayne Johnson. I think that could be really cool.
and that's
Um,
Josh Safdie directing as well. The first time the Safdie brothers have directed their solo movies. So no, I'm excited for that as
yep.
well.
And then Sinners, Companion, and I think the F1 movie. I think that's going to be cool.
It's Joseph Kosinski, who did Top Gun Maverick, who did Only the Brave, which is severely underrated as well. So no, I feel like that'd be cool. Sinners, I think, has one of the coolest trailers, because I know what the movie's about from reading what Ryan Coogler was making. So I know that I'm not going to spoil it for those who don't know, but like what kind of movie this is, the trailer gives away at no point. But when you watch that, you're like, oh, once they add that element into what I've seen, that's going to be a wild movie. That's going to be sick. Companion looks crazy. I'm excited for The Wolfman. I can tell we got a bit of a horror thing going on here. I think Lee Winnell is I think he's a really great director, and I'm excited to see what he can do with another Universal's monsters property. And I think there's so many. I think so many got pushed back. I know Spielberg's movie got pushed back to 2026, and Jordan Peele's movie got pushed back to 2026. So yeah, if they were next year, they'd be on there as well. But I'm excited. I think we're far enough removed from the strikes now, the writers' strikes and the actors' strikes, that we're going to start seeing a lot more frequently, more consistent content come out. Hopefully in the next year or so.
Yep. And just my favorites for the past year as
Yeah.
well. I also had on my list. I absolutely adored Civil War. I thought that was such a
Yes,
fun movie, especially as like somebody that started in newspaper journalism.
of
To
course.
watch that movie is fantastic.
It's a
And
love letter to journalism. Hey, yeah,
yep, Long Legs I thought
yeah,
was
great.
again severely underrated. And as a wrestling fan, the Iron Claw was
Oh,
amazing for me. It was such
I
a sad movie, but I loved it.
It's actually just I just picked up I had a couple of Blu-rays sent that I bought from the JB Black Friday sales and Iron Claws in there. And it's definitely that's a perfect example of like one that will never get played at movie night because my partner she'll watch the trailer and she'll go, that looks incredible. And she always kind of wants to find out what something's about before we watch it. And I said, oh, it's about these five brothers. They're wrestlers, blah, blah. And I was like, it does get really, really sad. And she was like, oh, how sad. And then you talk about what happens. And she's like, oh, I'm not watching that. Like, no matter how great it would be, like, it is that depressing of a story. But it is an incredible film. The fact that that got zero recognition at the Oscars is a farce, an absolute sham. It's part of the reason I don't get swept up in award season because 90% of the time they get it fucking wrong anyway.
Yeah, I think the release time for that one has hurt it at
Sure.
award season because it was seemingly so long ago now.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I absolutely agree. It just came out in this odd little time where nothing kind of happens. Like it's in our dead spot in Australian releases, but all the performances across the board are great. The screenplay is brilliant. The direction's brilliant. Like if you can handle a really heavy thematic film, it's worth your time for sure. Great pick. Yeah.
And yeah, don't look up the real story because it's
No.
even sadder than the movie.
I made that mistake. And yeah, that was and I did it right after watching it as well. So I was just I went from sad to sadder after watching that.
Alrighty, so finally, where is the best place for people to support you and track your creative journey moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, if you jump on Instagram at Nick's Flicks Fix, that's where all the video reviews go up, and I now put interview clips up and whatnot. And then if you want to see more written reviews and full write-ups of interviews, you can go to novastream.com.au. That's who I write for there. And then Nick's Flicks Fix on YouTube, I do a podcast called Monthly Movie Marathon with Peter Gray. And every month we choose a big release that's coming out and we watch all the essential viewing leading up to that. So our next one, we're doing Mufasa, the new Lion King film. We're watching the original animated, and you can call it, I guess, real life, but it's still animated Lion King that came out in 2019, and we'll talk about those before Mufasa comes up. So yeah, that's where you find me.
Brilliant. Alrighty, thank you so much for taking the time, and good luck. We'll catch you in the cinema in 2025.
Thank you so much for having me, man. This was a lot of fun. Thank you for having me.